Art+Logic Minimum Viable Podcast. Today we'll be talking to Daniel Popowich, one of our software developers. Hey, Daniel, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Really a pleasure to have you join us today. And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk with you is because you've had a very unique journey. Even though you are a software developer, you've also committed yourself to the stage and being an actor. So I was just hoping you could share with us some of how you got there and maybe how Art+Logic helped you sustain that or maintain that.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here today. I have been on the stage since I was a teenager. Got bit by the bug like many do in high school. And I actually wanted to pursue theater and specifically acting professionally from a young age. And that is a very long story, probably a longer story than we want here. But let's just say I should have turned left at Albuquerque and found myself in middle age not having pursued the theater as I wished. And not to get too, psychoanalytical here, but I was becoming a curmudgeon's curmudgeon. I was just not a pleasant person to be around. And I realized a lot of it was just I had this what if just hanging over me, this major what if. And when my youngest went off to college, I was then 48, started a family rather young. When I was 48, I found myself an empty nester and said to myself, it's now or never. I could just envision myself, being in my 80s in a nursing home where they wheeled me out to the rec room to have my daily heated argument with a potted plant.
An animated argument, no doubt.
An animated argument with a potted plant. I could have been a contender.
So while you were having, during those decades in between the bug and then kind of finding that you wanted to do something and really act on it, did you always feel the desire hovering over you? Like, was it always there in your mind?
Yeah, it was always there. And I had been pursuing an MFA in technical direction and lighting design at one point. Again, off the path of acting. But I was getting burnt out because I wasn't doing what I should be doing, but I was too young to figure it out. And I didn't have a good mentor to grab me by the scruff of the neck. Say, this is what you should be doing. And I fell back on a computer science minor that I had, and I got a job doing, essentially I was a computer operator at a local VA hospital, working the 3:30 a.m. to noon shift. That was my first geek job.
Like your own version of Taxi Driver.
Yeah, but with less blood. Yeah. So for those decades, I had been, I had mostly self-taught. I did have the computer science coursework from my undergraduate work, which I should go back and say, when I went off to college and wanted to pursue theater, I was told, no uncertain terms, that my college education would not be paid for by my parents if I pursued theater. And back when I was back when I was in high school, before I got the theater bug, I'd been hanging around with the geeks. I was a math geek, a computer science geek. I was in the back room with the card reader, hacking the OC's computer system, like good teenagers did in the 70s. Right. Back before it was, a federal crime. so I'd always been interested in computer science. I had this bizarre left-right brain thing going. So when I went off to college, I was a computer science major at first. And it took me a couple years to soften up my parents, and then I switched to a drama major.
Wow.
And then went off to graduate school for this MFA. And then when my oldest was born, when my wife was first pregnant, there was kind of a financial crisis. Plus, I was burnt out in graduate school. So that's when I got a real job. Air quotes around real and job. And so for decades, I was a software engineer.
And during that time while you were a software engineer, did you ever have an opportunity to still work in any kind of theater technology or anything like that?
Well, so it had been about 10 years. 10 years from the last time I was on stage to the next time I was. My wife at the time told, I came home from work one day and sitting on the kitchen table was the 5 College Theater News Bulletin. We had just moved to Western Mass the previous year, and the 5 colleges around Amherst and Northampton, UMass Amherst, Smith College, Amherst College, Mount Holyoke, and Hampshire College. Mm-hmm. They had those 5 colleges had some departments which were so-called 5 college departments. Theater was one of them. And they had auditions open to the community. And my wife had heard about this and knew I was kind of suffering inside and sat me down at the kitchen table, opened it up to this big, long list of auditions for the upcoming fall season at the colleges and said, we'll audition for one of these. First week of January 2014. I started at Art+Logic, and that's what really opened up the door. I didn't want to move to city immediately. I wanted to make sure that it was going to work and needed to prove myself. And then I was ready to do it in 2015, but then I got cast as Uncle Vanya in a production of Uncle Vanya. And I thought, well, I got to do this. So that kept me around for a little bit longer. But then in June of 2016, I made the leap and I came down to New York. And so I, thank you, Art+Logic, for that kind of flexibility.
I think that your experience kind of speaks to, at least during the pandemic and after the pandemic, it speaks to a lot of the frustration that I kept seeing from people who were, like companies that were trying to experiment with remote work and people who were trying to get remote work, is that there wasn't enough trust from the employer and the contractor or the employee. You were saying this earlier. And if you're not trusted to get the work done, then it's harder to give you that flexibility to have your own life. And I think one of the things about Art+Logic that's helped it succeed is that it was founded by musicians. So they were artists. They had the same kind of desire to have lives outside of the work. And I think it's, every time I hear a story like yours, I just think it's great to know that there's a company that's doing it right, like letting you nurture your own interests, feed your kind of passions, and then just trust you to get the work done. And because, when people are trusted, they tend to perform more. And it's like,
I can't speak enough about if you treat people like adults, they will surprise you and behave like adults. Mm-hmm. And that trust is, that trust given to you, I find, becomes a responsibility that I want to fulfill. I also want this to work. I'll tell you, being an actor, even an actor who's been on Broadway, it is a fickle business. It's there and then it's gone. So, I do need the day job. I love working for Art+Logic. The work is often very exciting. So yeah, I don't take it for granted. And so I make sure my responsibilities are taken care of.
So what is that like for you, like working on software project? And I know there are times when working for a software development firm or working on a project, it can be very insular. And you might have some contacts with people out within the project a few times a week, but it's not the same as working in the same room with people or being surrounded by people. And so what is that like to go from working on the software to stepping onto a stage or to even to going out to audition?
Yeah, it is two totally different worlds. Now, it's interesting. I would say in my 30 years, I'm 60 now. And it was actually 30 plus years, because 34 years of being a geek by day. I would say I can count on one hand the number of actors I have met who are also software engineers. Far more musicians, I think.
Yeah, not surprised.
I think there's so much math behind music. Mm-hmm. And being a musician can be an insular activity. You're in your own mind a lot, I think in both. But I haven't found, dancers or a lot of painters or, it's a pretty, well, we all know what we mean by a geek, we know it when we see it.
That is true. Yeah.
So it's been a very, very, very rare thing for me to find someone like myself who is both a software engineer and an actor. So very, very different worlds. I don't get there's not a lot of people in the day job world that can relate to my theater world. And if people are talking about, oh, what do you do for your day job in, say, an acting class or whatnot, and I say I'm a software engineer, looks like it. Really? Oh my. Mostly they can think
immediately assume that you're an introvert.
I think immediately they think, wow, I bet that's a bigger paycheck than my my bartending job.
Right? Yeah.
So it is very different worlds, and sometimes it can be, because when your mind is inside an algorithm, you're living inside a place inside your head that how do you describe it? You just keep burrowing deeper and deeper and deeper into the algorithm, trying to solve it. And then I say, oh shoot, it's time to go down to that audition. And and then I'm on the subway and I'm going down, and I should be focusing on the audition. But I have found it's just the way the brain works. It can't let go. Can't let go of that algorithm. I don't think probably many service industry people have that problem,
Probably not.
Probably not. So I have found it challenging sometimes to let go of the computer side.
Yeah, I've never heard it described that way, but I can absolutely picture that. It sounds very similar to being lost in a very absorbing book, where you're kind of absorbed in the narrative or absorbed in this world, and that algorithm becomes like this labyrinth type world in your mind.
Yeah, and it can be a little obsessive. Mm-hmm. Many a night I go to sleep and I find solace and comfort as I just think through that problem I've been trying to solve all day. yeah, it is interesting. So anyway, Art+Logic, get back on track here. Art+Logic allowed me to make this move. And in 2016, I came down and I started getting involved in a couple prominent acting studios, taking classes at acting studios. One was T. Schreiber, and the other was HB Studio. And both were little homes, you know. They, not only the class, but the studios did their own productions, small and large. And I started doing some, meeting people, doing some showcases. And I've been doing that for about not 2.5 years when I realized that the industry had really changed. That while it was artistically satisfying, it wasn't satisfying from a business standpoint. Agents and casting directors weren't going to showcases. At least not the kinds of showcases I was. They'd still go to, say, NYU, a Tisch School showcase. They're always looking for young talent because you can't cast 20-somethings without 20-somethings. No way, this gray hair is going to be cast as, a 25-year-old, right? So you're always looking for young talent. Their Rolodexes are filled with all the talent they've known over the years. So they have bushels of 30s and 40s. So plus a number of outfits had started up, which often referred to as pay-to-plays. You go to the organization and you pay to take a workshop, scare quotes around workshop, with a casting director or agent. It is illegal to pay for employment. So these are workshops.
Right.
But it is the way to meet people. Most actors have a love-hate relationship with these classes because and sometimes it does feel like you are paying for the privilege to meet someone. Right. Not to say you don't get information because, you learn what does this casting director look for or that casting director look for, and you do acquire skills, audition skills, which are not necessarily acting skills. There's a whole craft. An audition, you try to put your mind in the, how do I want to say this? When you walk in the audition room, you are more successful if you can treat it like a performance. But it's not a performance, but yet it is a performance. The audition experience is very different than the actual performance, which is probably not the same for, say, a musician who's, competing for a chair, right? Monologues, you try to give a monologue a beginning, middle, and end, which may or may not be there in the context of the play. Anyway, so I in June of 2019, started doing these workshops, and then it's a matter of choosing who do I want to meet. And I saw there was a casting director who is responsible for casting replacements, the Broadway production of Harry Potter. And I thought, well, that would be a good person to meet. There's a great track in that show. And if he's ever looking for someone my age in it would be good to. And we really hit it off. really hit it off in a 2-week workshop. And enough that I felt comfortable writing him after and asking his advice on how someone like me, mid-50s, moved to the city. No one knows me. How do you get a foot in the door? Is certainly you know so many people my age by now. And he suggested you should try understudy auditions. Because a lot of actors your age are, they're lightly attended for various reasons. But they're lightly attended, and so you have perhaps a better exposure. Fast forward a month, I saw in understudy auditions for 3 men in their 50s for an upcoming production of the Lehman trilogy. And I said, oh my God, that's perfect. That's what Alexander was just telling me. And I said, who's casting this? And I scanned over to the other side of the page, and I saw casting expected at auditions, Alexander Blue, the person I had just taken a class from.
Oh,
like, oh my God. So I went to the audition. It was the first time I had ever walked into an audition of that stature, a Broadway audition. And the person on the other side of the table said, hey, Daniel, good to see you. That had never happened. So clearly these workshops do work. And while I didn't get the understudy, I found out just before going into that audition that also in the show was this non-speaking ensemble that appears at one point in the play. So I asked Alexander, I know there's a call for the ensemble next week. Do I have to go to that, or am I considered having done this? He said, no, you don't have to do that. You'll be considered having done this. I got home, and that afternoon I got a call back for the ensemble.
It's wonderful. And
I went into the callback. 80-something people were called back for this ensemble of 14, and
oh wow!
I got it, and it was so I've been in New York for just a little over 3 years. I landed a Broadway show, so validation. That was there I was on Broadway. Sadly, sadly,
2019.
Theater films so dependent on a massive production,
right?
Even a community theater, it's still an unbelievable undertaking of a group of people. Part of me says, hey, I can die a happy man. I was on Broadway. I'm on the Internet Broadway database. There I am. So it's pretty cool.
That is very cool. Thank you, Daniel. It was a pleasure having you as our guest today. And to those of you out there, thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from Art+Logic, you can subscribe to our Minimum Viable podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast apps.